Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. One of the effects of the pandemic has to do with how we consume information. Not only did we learn that it is not completely necessary to go into a physical office to perform our duties, but we discovered that education can somehow follow suit. In an effort to provide as many options for people to obtain an education, schools have expanded their offerings to include online learning. These courses are offered in synchronous or asynchronous versions. We know that synchronous online courses still require everyone to be present at a designated time, albeit from multiple locations. We also know that, by contrast, asynchronous online courses allow participants to access the information when they want to, as well as where they want. Therein lies the potential problem. While students interact with the content at various times of the day that are convenient for them, they miss out on an important aspect of learning: student and teacher interaction. Who does a student reach out to with any questions? How or when do they reach out? How do professors determine who needs help and who does not? While the information regarding office hours, virtual or otherwise, is listed in the syllabus and repeated throughout the semester, it seems that students do not reach out as frequently as they could or should until it is too late. So, how do professors ensure their students get more individual attention in an asynchronous online class? Our next guest may have an answer. Dr. Jill Weber, an associate professor in the accounting department at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, has implemented a number of strategies to make her students aware that even in a fully asynchronous online class, they have an active, attentive, and responsive professor ready to help them. So let's welcome Professor Jill Weber to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to carve out some time from your schedule to take part in this discussion, because I know that a lot of our college students especially, they probably feel that they kind of get ignored when the educational landscape, because everybody focuses on K-12 so much. So I like to have the opportunity to address our higher education students from time to time. But now that we have this landscape where we have the multiple ways of educating, we do need to discuss, well, how do students from wherever they are, especially our international students, how do we make them feel more comfortable in an online learning environment? So I'm glad you're able to share with us some of your expertise on this. So I guess my first question would be, how long have you actually been teaching asynchronous classes?
Well, I have been a professor since 2015, but I started teaching asynchronous online courses in 2018. And so since then, I've taught probably 20 to 30 sections of online courses.
And have those courses kind of increased? I would assume they kind of ballooned even during the pandemic. That's when everybody was teaching kind of online or asynchronous or developing those types of courses. So I guess, when did you realize that there was some sort of disconnect with your students in those types in that mode of education?
I think pretty early on, right? Because I think that the biggest challenge in asynchronous education is that the sort of organic, spontaneous communication that you have in a classroom is just gone, right? It just does not happen. And so I would have students that would kind of just disappear at higher rates than, in a traditional face-to-face class. And students that wouldn't reach out, they would be confused about due dates, even though I thought everything was set up super clear and obviously. And so I realized pretty quickly that it was a whole different ballgame.
So I wonder how that whole dynamic takes place, because again, As a professor, when you set up your course, you painstakingly go through looking for resource to fit a particular activity, and you go through the entire syllabus with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everything, at least in your mind, is clear. You may even have other people read the syllabus to see what they take out of it, so that by the time you do post it, you think, yeah, everything is letter perfect. All you have to do is plug and play. And so there should be no problems. But inevitably, that's not always the case. So what do we do in that situation?
I think what's going on is they're not reading it. And I don't entirely blame them, because we're living in this information overload, especially if they're taking more than one class at a time. They have so much written information coming at them, right? I know I delete a ton of emails that I receive, right, without really reading them. Even newsletters that I've subscribed to, I don't read, right? And so I think that even if the syllabus or whatever it is that you've posted for your students is perfect, it doesn't matter if they're not reading it. And to contrast that to a face-to-face class, even a student that shows up and doesn't care and is going to be on their phone, for most of the class anyways, they're still sort of paying attention for the first 5 or 10 minutes of the class when you're reminding them, hey, your project is due. And so that to me is the biggest thing, is they're simply not reading your announcements. They're not watching your videos.
So it's almost like, at least in person, you kind of learn through osmosis, right? That the information is going to get in your head some kind of way, even if you're not really paying attention. But on asynchronously, you do miss out on that aspect of it. So how effective, or have you tried, and I'm sure you have, what has been your experience using, I guess, the message boards and so that students can kind of respond to each other, and when they sign in, they see these messages on the board that other students have posted, and they respond to each other. What has been your experience with that? Is it effective and not effective? How does it work for you?
Yeah, I am not a huge fan of discussion boards. I know that in online classes that I've been a student in, I find them to be a nuisance, and I think my students find them to be a nuisance. I know that there are some professors who do them very well, but what I've found over time is that a lot of online students aren't necessarily looking to be real social and engaged with their classmates, right? They just kind of want to get in, get the content, pass the class, and go home. And so I feel like a lot of them view it as a chore. Okay, I have to go talk to this person in my class about some topic I don't care about to get the points. So I use discussion boards somewhat more minimally than you might expect.
So I guess, what do you do? How do you incentivize students to be more proactive in whatever and how they gather the information from the courses that you've developed?
So my number one tip that I'll give to anybody, like the first thing I'll mention, is I gave up on waiting for them to reach out to me if they needed help. I was like, this is not working. I can tell them, email me. I'm ready to help you, until I'm blue in the face, and they won't do it if they need help. And so I now require them, like for course points, to fill out a weekly feedback survey each week, where I ask them, where were you stuck? What was the hardest part? And I find that has just revolutionized the way that I teach, because inevitably the same topics emerge, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like every student has a different problem. They all are getting stuck in one or two key areas. And so most of the students I can respond to in a group format, in terms of I'll make a video on that challenging topic and post it for them. The students that have quick questions that weren't the main recurring theme questions, those ones I'll send out a quick written reply. And then the students who are just totally lost, right? When I say, what was the most challenging thing this week? And they write everything. That's the student that I'll personally reach out to and say, hey, let's set up a time to meet, and I can talk through what's going on with you. And I have found that forcing them to talk to me rather than hoping that they'll talk to me has just made all the difference.
And I think that's what is probably the biggest piece of it, and that's the outreach that the professor does with the students. I guess you're going to have some of those professors that are going to say, well, they're adults now and they should take on this responsibility, and they know that okay, fine, but they're still children, right? Because that's how we refer to them also, that there are children and so forth. So I think taking that personal step will actually be a better way of doing it, of approaching this, than just saying, well, they're adults now and they should take on this responsibility, as opposed to being the adult in the room, so to speak, and taking that first step.
And I have, and respect people that have that opinion. And I feel like I sort of used to have that opinion, and I think there's some validity to it. But at the end of the day, I just think of it from the perspective of, I'm trying to be the best educator that I can be. I'm trying to get as many students to succeed in this course as I possibly can. And so whether they're doing what they should or not is sort of not my problem, right? My problem is, what can I be doing to help them? And that's kind of what leads me to how I run things.
This is kind of a two-part question here. How long does it typically take you to build an asynchronous course? And when do you find the time to create those videos that you stated, whether they're the ones responding to the students or even the weekly videos that you may post at the beginning of the week, letting people know these are things that are coming up?
So the first question, it takes an eternity to set up an asynchronous course. I'm blessed in that at UW-Whitewater, we have like an in-house recording studio with a green screen and everything to record like our lecture videos. And so that's great, right? I'll go and I'll reserve a time and record those ahead of time for the actual like planned content videos. But no, setting up the LMS page, right? We use Canvas where I'm at. Takes forever, right? And making sure that you've got all your learning objectives mapped to your videos and mapped to different ungraded practice assignments they can do and graded assignments they can do and all the due dates. I mean, it takes forever. So you have to know that going in, that it is a ton of work up front. And then in terms of the like weekly kind of response videos that are sort of more impromptu during the course, I just make those on my own computer. And I usually set aside sometime on Monday, right? Because I have my stuff due on a Sunday. And so if I can do it first thing in the morning on a Monday, that's my preference. I'll go through all the survey responses. I'll make a video. I'll post all my announcements, kind of like, okay, welcome to the next week. But sometimes it bleeds into Monday afternoon, especially if I'm teaching a face-to-face course on Monday morning, then I can't really get to it until later. But I try to do it. It's like the first thing on my to-do list each week.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Dr. Jill Weber, an associate professor in the accounting department at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Well, I'm glad you went there, because the question that I wanted to get to is, if it takes so much time and effort and energy to build that asynchronous course, you would think that, okay, I built it, now I'm done with it, until they start sending in their responses and their activities. So wouldn't it seem almost more burdensome to attach these graded surveys to everything and then to continuously go in and create more videos? You're just kind of creating more work for yourself, especially when you have these face-to-face classes that you also have to prepare for.
Isn't that the story of education, that you're creating more work for yourself? I mean, it absolutely is. I am creating more work for myself. But at the end of the day, I want to deliver a good online course. I want my students to learn. I want them to succeed. And for me, it takes maybe an hour a week, right, to go through these surveys and then make a video. I've got the process down so it is efficient. And I just think it's absolutely worth it. I think the entire experience is better for the students, but also for me, right? Because as instructors, we have this natural desire to know how our students are doing. Are they doing the work? Where are they getting stuck? What's going on with them? And I found that, before I did these sort of weekly feedback survey response video thing, I just sort of had no idea, hope they're doing good, right? I hope my students are doing the homework. I hope they're doing well. So for me, is it more work? Yes. Is it worth it? Absolutely yes.
With that, what has the difference been between before when you didn't do all the extra work to now when you have those surveys and some of the other strategies you've used that we'll get into in a moment? But what have you noticed is the difference in quality of student responses when you've changed up those strategies?
I think that the student, when I ask them, what was your biggest challenge this week? It forces a sort of self-reflection on their part for them to kind of go, okay, what was hard this week? Did I even do what I was supposed to do this week, right? Is it my own fault that I don't understand this topic or not, right? Because plenty of times they'll say, oh, it was such and such a topic, but I don't really have a question. I just know I need to spend more time reviewing this topic, right? And so it kind of kicks in that sort of the personal responsibility of each student to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so I think that self-reflection process helps them. I think it kind of it just makes them more aware that they're in charge of their own learning process. And so I think that's helpful. And I also think it just helps them kind of keep on track, keep engaged. It helps them to know that I'm reading this every week and I'm responding to it every week.
So how other than the surveys that you put out there, what are some of the other ways, some of the other strategies that you've enacted in order to get more student engagement with your courses?
Sure. So in terms of student-to-student interaction, right, we mentioned how I really can't stand the discussion forums, but I still do group projects, right? Because student-to-student interaction is just, a best practice first and foremost, right? But also it is sort of expected by our accreditation body. And so I have to have, right, that student-student interaction. And so I do group projects. But of course, as I was doing more and more group projects and online courses, I was getting more and more emails saying, I've been emailing this guy in my group. He won't respond. He won't do anything. It's not fair that he gets the same grade as me, and on and on. Mm-hmm. And so I started just this past semester doing what I call sort of group project planning discussions. So I do use the discussion forums, but really only for this purpose, right. Where I sort of, again, I assign points. So in that way, it's sort of making them do something because most students will do something for points. It's a discussion purely devoted to logistics. So they have to say, hi, I'm so-and-so. Here's how I think we should attack this project, right? Whether it's they want to divvy up the work and then review each other's work, or if they want to just do a live, Zoom call and do it all together. But to say how they want to do it, what they think the best strategy is, when they're available for meetings, right? What sort of self-imposed deadlines they want to have. And I have this discussion be due before the time that I'm expecting them to even begin working on the project, with the goal of everybody in the group is walking into this group project having some sort of shared agreement on how they're going to do it. And I find that just helps because there's less of these emails that I'm getting saying my group member is just totally missing. What do I do? So I think it's working.
How do you I'm sure you have students from multiple time zones who are trying to access the coursework and so forth. So how do you set up your office hours to accommodate all of those different students? Because I know I had a few students who are in China, and if I'm here in New York, what we're looking at almost a 12-hour time difference here. So I don't really expect students to show up at 9 a.m. when Eastern time for them and so forth. So how do you set up your office hours? How do you accommodate them with that?
So I also teach face-to-face classes. And so I, of course, have like physical walk-in office hours for those face-to-face classes. And so I let my online students and my on-campus students know, hey, I'm happy to do a video call during that time as well. Just, let me know and I'll pop in my WebEx room or whatever it's called. So they have that option, but also I don't pick a certain time for online specific office hours because I know that whatever time I pick is not going to work for them, right? And so I am pretty flexible with appointments, right? I will meet with my students morning, afternoon, evening, weekend, with enough, advance notice, obviously. And the way that I kind of justify that sort of imposition on my personal life is that I know that my work schedule is very flexible as a professor, right? Like I can just decide I'm not working a certain afternoon and take my kid to the zoo, right? But then I shift, the work to the evening or the weekend or whatever it is. And so I know that not every, professor is willing to do that, and that's every professor's call. But for me, I'm meeting with students kind of whenever they want. And I find that it's not even that frequently, right? I mean, a lot of students don't want to come to office hours. So I have found that thus far, it has not been an imposition on my personal life.
How do you feel about the notion of having to, well, I guess having to may not be the right term, but having to really incentivize the activities in order to get the students' participation? I mean, because again, you have those old-time professors who may say, well, no, this is just their responsibility. They need to do it just because it has to get done, as opposed to, well, let's give them a couple extra points here, or give them extra credit there. And so you kind of really, you're bribing the students in a sense. So how do we kind of reconcile that aspect to get the students to really to engage?
I've just sort of become not as much of an idealist as my career has gone on, because of course I definitely have that sort of, cranky old man inside me somewhere that's like, they're adults, they should be doing it, I shouldn't be doing this. But at the end of the day, I had to just let that go and go with what works. And so, yes, I am bribing my students with, a point here, a point there to get them to do things. And, how do I reconcile that with sort of my, cranky old man principles? You got to do what works. So it also varies depending on the level of the course, right? So if it's a 200 level undergraduate course, I do have to hold their hand a little bit more and have a little bit more of here's the point there, here's the point there. But if you think about it, right, when you're potty training a child, right, or doing something, we do use little incentives, right? Like, okay, you get a gold star, you get an M&M or whatever it is. And so with the 200 level, there is a bit more of that. I find that, for example, my MBA students don't need as much of that. And so for me, it's just a training them. Some of these students don't know how to be a student. And so if I have to bribe them in order to condition them into being good students, well, that's fine, right? I had to bribe my kids with M&Ms to learn to be potty trained.
But, and I'm glad that you also mentioned that students don't necessarily know how to be students, because you'll get a lot of students who will come into this thinking, oh, it's an asynchronous class, which means I can access it whenever I feel like it and it's very independent learning and so forth. But sometimes those are the hardest classes to really get a grasp of, because before you know it, 5 weeks into the semester have gone by and you have a midterm coming up that you haven't even cracked open a book for. Because you feel I'll get to it when I want to. So talk to us about that. How do you get the students to really buckle down in an asynchronous class from day one?
Yeah. Well, I tell them up front that I think it's harder, right? I think that an asynchronous course, all else equal, is harder than a face-to-face course, right? Because you are sort of by yourself. I'm not there standing in the classroom, going, oh, how's it going over there, right? And so you do have to be a self-starter. You do have to have time management and organization and discipline. And so I do sort of give them that disclaimer up front. But then I also try and design the course to sort of help facilitate them being on pace, right? So I have like a weekly guide for each week that says, this week, here's what you have to accomplish, right? We're doing these learning objectives. You have to do this reading, watch these videos. And I'll tell them like, oh, this week is a heavier week, right? Or this, topic within this week, this one's really hard. This is where students get stuck. So make sure you read this portion of the textbook twice and those sorts of things. So there are elements of course design that are useful. And then at least in my LMS, in the grade book, there's an easy feature where I can just sort of select, okay, message all the students who have not submitted this assignment. It makes it really easy. And so I do nag them a bit, right? It's like, hey, you missed this due date. What's going on? Do you need help, right? Like, are you aware that you missed the due date? And so being a bit more hands-on in that regard.
Excellent. And, we could have this conversation for another 30 minutes or so, but we would certainly like to thank our guest today, Dr. Jill Weber, Associate Professor in the Accounting Department at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, for coming on to our show today.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.